includes rides to medical appointments, private home aides, doctors and nurses visits by telephone, and even home-delivered meals. The plan also includes... Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We are back, week 2. Trying to get it right. Let's see if anyone is going to check in with me. Good morning, Ashley. Good morning, good morning. Come on in. We're going to go ahead and get started this morning. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Anasia, good morning. The orange sipper. This is the worst time. I'm sorry, orange sipper. Could you tell me who you are, orange sipper? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, TJ. Got math class going on. Just trying to see if we can get a few more people. Aya in the house. Good morning. The running gunner. What's up, Skylar? What's going on, brother? I know who you are. Glad to see you join us this morning. And wait a few minutes just to see how many people we can gather up. Just a few minutes. If you're getting in, go ahead and open up the PowerPoint I posted in Edmodo. I titled The Progressive Era. Also, you'll see your guided reading there as well. This week, I decided to go ahead and post a guided reading. And I'm not going to say I'm going to do this every week or for every guided reading, but I posted you basically a guided reading that's already filled out. So you don't necessarily have to sit and fill it out. We are going to have a separate assignment that's going to be that I'm going to post that you're going to turn in. It's going to check for understanding a little bit. But go ahead and open up that PowerPoint, and the first page is a warm-up. So start that warm-up. Do a little class review here. Hopefully everybody can access the PowerPoint. My beard is a little out of control at this point. So I want to give everybody to like 10. Trying to get in still, sorry. Yeah. You guys a little bit of time. We want to be able to give everybody a chance to get in. And 10:30 may not be the best time. We'll see. I'll schedule it so a notification will go out to people that we're going to start at 10:30. Did you guys get a notification today that we're starting at 10:30? I scheduled it probably about 10:20 to see if people could jump on and if they would get that notification and maybe they jump on with us. Did anyone get that notification? Do you guys have your notification set? Anyone? Nobody? No one? I didn't get the notification. I just got a notice when you started. Okay. Okay. I've got to figure that out. I scheduled it for 10:30. Okay. I'll play with it a little bit today, see if I can get that figured out. Thank you. Appreciate it. What up, Quessy? My man. Quessy, I posted a new PowerPoint on Edmodo. And also I posted a new guided reading. So that's where we are. We are in that PowerPoint and we're in that guided reading and we are doing the warm-up on page 1 of the PowerPoint. Boop, 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 boop. So we'll start answering questions at 10:40. 10:40, we'll start answering the questions. Everybody good? I'm pulling them up. How was your weekends? That's what we would do if we were in class, right? Did anybody do anything wonderful, exciting, or new this weekend? I think I already know the answer to that since everybody's not supposed to be doing anything. But hopefully you have wonderful weekends. Still, you got a chance to hang out with family or do something fun around the house. Awesome. That's nice. Worked on a project all weekend. Did you get it done? Hopefully, if you got it done, then that was a great weekend. It's over now. You knocked it out. Games and movies, good stuff. Good stuff. Slow alaikum, buddy. Well, I was hoping that moving back, it took forever. I was up to like 1:30. Ooh, see, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to have plenty of time to get stuff done and be relaxing and chillaxing. Once you're up 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning trying to finish a project. All right, 10:40. Let's get started. Number one, the question asks, how did Black codes limit African American rights in the Reconstruction South? How did black codes limit African American rights in the Black South? In the Reconstruction South, I'm sorry. Someone give me an answer for number one. Just shoot it out there. Somebody? Anybody? Anybody want to go for it? Yeah, nay. Says we got 12 people live. I've only heard from a handful. If you're on, give me a shout out. What up, Anaya? It should be. There was a PowerPoint that I posted in Edmodo. I created a new post in Edmodo, kind of just talking about what we're going to do for the week. And attached to that post is the PowerPoint. Also attached to those notes are the guided reading. Is the guided reading for the PowerPoint. So if no one has, what's up, Molly? Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. The first time seeing you on our live. Good stuff. All right, so I'm going to just go start going over the questions because I don't want to waste too much time and I don't want to spend too much time, too much of your time. All right, Naja, what you got? Black codes made it difficult for them to exercise their rights or something right? Absolutely, black codes did do that. So a lot of the black codes were specific codes that really restricted African Americans. Things that go underneath the umbrella of black codes would be curfew laws. It made it illegal in some places for African American males to not have a job. If they didn't have a job, they could be arrested. They also implemented things like literacy tests and poll taxes and grandfather clauses. All of those fit underneath these black codes. They were specific laws that were written that restricted the ability for African Americans to exercise their constitutional right. So even though African American males had been given the constitutional right to vote, with the use of black codes and intimidation from the KKK, um, that right was being restricted, if not completely eliminated by the black codes. Okay? So black code is very important. Big EOC item. We're saying EOC item. We may never take the EOC, but we'll see how that goes. Next question. What event ended the Reconstruction? Can anybody give me a quick one right there? What event ended the Reconstruction? Molly, this is your question. You got it, Molly. Kill it. Throw it out there. Anybody can answer. I'm just messing with Molly, but anybody can answer. What ended Reconstruction? What event ended Reconstruction? That's true, Anaya. And Anaya knows that because I created the class. And in order for me to grant an assignment, I had to put some student in the class. So I put Anaya in the class. So right now, she's the only person who's been assigned. But we'll talk about that towards the end. We talk about what I want you guys to do in USA Test Prep. But stay on topic, Anaya. Answer number 2. What event? This should be an easy one right here. What event ended Reconstruction? Good. You are special, Naya. Your name is also at the top of the alphabet, so that compromise is not very close, Jayden. And welcome in. I'm glad you're here, man. Compromise of 1877. Yeah, not the Civil War, but the Compromise of 1877. And the Compromise of 1877 led to one thing that really ended Reconstruction, and that is the removal of the troops from the South. When the troops marched out of the South, that is the event that ended the Reconstruction. So very good, Jayden. The election of 1876 leads to the Compromise of 1877, and the Compromise of 1877 included the removal of the federal troops from the South, ending Reconstruction. All right, very important, very very important stuff. Okay. Next question. The Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan were conflicting arguments about. Anybody got a quick answer for that one? New Jersey plan, Virginia plan, they were conflicting arguments about what? New Jersey plan, Virginia plan. Remember, this deals specifically with the Constitution, the writing of the Constitution. It was one of the early compromises in the U.S. Government. Something to do with population. Yeah, has something to do with population, but what are they? What are they conflicting about? I'm going to go ahead and answer so we can move on. The Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan are dealing with the argument of representation in Congress, how the states would be represented in Congress. That's what they were conflicting about. The New Jersey plan suggests that every state be represented in Congress equally. That regardless of the population in your state, and that's where population comes in, regardless of the number of people, the population size of your state, every state should be represented equally. And the Virginia plan argued that representation in Congress should be determined by population, meaning the bigger your population, the more representation you should receive. Those two plans are negotiated into what is known as the Great Compromise. And we've talked about that a lot. The Great Compromise suggests that we take Congress, we make Congress into a bicameral legislature, which means having two houses. One is the Senate, one is the House of Representatives. The Senate, which is the upper house, would be equal, and the House of Representatives would be based on population. Okay, so very important, but it is the issue of how the states would be represented answers that question. Excuse me. How did the Dred Scott case impact slavery? I'm just going to go ahead and kind of answer these. But the Dred Scott case impacted slavery tremendously because it was a landmark case, especially for the times. And the decision of the case stated, and here was the Supreme Court, the federal government, really for the first time, really talking about the constitutionality of slavery. But Dred Scott, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, handed down the decision that slaves were property, that slaves could not sue for their freedom, and that a slave could not be taken away from his master without due process of law, regardless of where he was. So essentially and technically, what the Supreme Court was stating was that slavery could exist anywhere, that slavery was constitutional anywhere in the United States, and that this whole idea of slave states and free states was essentially unconstitutional. So the anti-slavery people saw this as a defeat and as a big problem, and the pro-slavery advocates of the time saw this as a tremendous victory. Okay. Next question: what did Washington warn against in his farewell address? If you want to throw an answer out, please do. But Washington warned against two things primarily. That was foreign alliances and political parties. Washington thought both of them could destroy the fabric of the U.S. government. And then your last question: how do monopolies hurt consumers? We spent a great deal of time on that last week. Monopolies hurt consumers because they drive up prices, they eliminate competition, they destroy incentive. And when we say destroy incentive, we're talking about the incentive to create a better product, the incentive to have better customer service, the incentive to do all of the things that are important to the consumer. So the consumers are the ones that are manipulated in a monopoly. They're the ones that lose out. Okay. All right. Let's move on a little bit, talk about the progressive era. And because we don't have anything to fill out, really, hopefully, guys, you guys are just following along. And with the PowerPoint, and we can talk, you guys can ask questions as we go forward. But the progressive era, I said this last week, is a movement in American history. It's really a social movement, but obviously there were economic and political agendas during the progressive era as well. But this is one of my favorite time periods to discuss in American history, because here is where we first begin to see the government being used to try and make social and political reform, and try to use the government to try and meet the needs of individuals in society. Understand this: up till this point, the vast majority of Americans did not believe that the government was designed for social engineering, to solve social problems. That was not the function of government. That social problems were social problems, and the government had nothing to do with that. If you think about the other reform movements we talked about, the temperance movement, the abolitionist movement, some of these other movements, even public school reform, the public school movement, those were social movements that the government didn't necessarily feel that they had any real responsibility to do anything about that. But here we're starting to see a change and a shift in that. And that's because there were some serious social, economic, and political problems inside of the United States. And so the progressives were the people, they were the politicians, they were the statesmen that took it upon themselves to urge the government to do something that would help the people. So progressives intended to use the government to bring about reform. And that's a controversial topic even till this day. There are lots of people who feel that the government has assumed way too much responsibility when it comes to social engineering and social welfare. And so that's a very controversial topic. And in many ways, that kind of places people somewhere on the political spectrum, towards the conservative or liberal side. So we see for the first time really in US history, this become a big topic during the progressive era. Okay, going on to the PowerPoint, and I'm not going to go terribly far today, but I am going to discuss maybe the first 4 or 5 slides. from economic reform and economic reform. We already discussed the problems that were going on with big business. Big business was out of control. There's no two ways about that. Big business has soaked up way too much power, influence, and economic power. The distribution between the wealth, distribution between the poor and the rich was getting wider and wider and wider. And there were particular politicians, one of which was Teddy Roosevelt, who becomes president of the United States, that believed that these big businesses held too much power. But the people who really exposed these big businesses for who they were and the negative aspect of what they did were journalists. Journalists at the time wrote articles, newspaper articles, magazine articles that really informed the people of the problem with big business and the problem with these corporations. Teddy Roosevelt really didn't like the fact that these journalists did so, but they did play a very important role. And so he coined the phrase that these people were muckrakers, that they raked up muck, they raked up bad things and bad feelings and bad ideas that they put into the minds of people about what was going on. So a journalist who wrote about the need for reform in magazine and books and newspapers, they became known as muckrakers. And we're going to talk about some of the famous muckrakers of the day. If you look on page 7, there is that there's the political cartoon there. It says the muck rake and some of the muck. You see Teddy Roosevelt there as he is raking up different journalists. Teddy Roosevelt did not like muckrakers, even though in some ways he agreed with them, but he felt like their journalism was bad. And we have kind of a similar kind of dynamic today with President Trump and his criticisms of the media and the way that they talk about things and display things. He feels like they do a negative and a poor job of informing the American people, or just giving the American people a negative perspective on everything. And so Teddy Roosevelt has had somewhat of a similar relationship with the press during his presidency. But one of these muckrakers was a very famous muckraker. His name was Upton Sinclair, and he wrote a book called The Jungle. You have to know this. And then you just word associate. And remember in class, we always try to get you try to train our brains to when we hear certain things to think certain things. So when you see the word, so you hear the name Upton Sinclair, what the word it has to, the phrase that has to pop into your mind is the jungle. So you say it 3 times, Upton Sinclair, the jungle. Upton Sinclair, the jungle. Upton Sinclair, the jungle. You help to try and train your mind to word associate those two things together. And that's a very important thing. So Upton Sinclair writes this book called The Jungle. Let me tell the story here a little bit. Upton Sinclair was a muckraker. He was a journalist, and he kind of went undercover. And what he was attempting to do was to expose the plight of workers inside of the meatpacking industry. That's what he was attempting to do, just to talk about the way that the workers were treated and the conditions that they were under and so on and so forth. What he ends up doing is realizing the horrible conditions under which the animals were, how the animals were treated, how they were slaughtered, how the meat was stored, how it was packaged, just the unsanitary conditions of these meat stockyards. He ends up writing more about those things than he does anything else. And that's a very powerful thing and a very impactful thing, because today in the United States, for the most part, even though maybe we should be a lot more aware and maybe even fearful of the condition of the meat that we eat, we really don't. We go to McDonald's or Burger King or Chick-fil-A or we go to the grocery store and we eat meat, and we don't think this could kill us. We don't think that it's contaminated. We trust that the proper sanitation has taken place in regards to the storing of this meat, the preparation of this meat, and everything else that goes along with it, which is a very involved process. We don't do that. We just go in, we buy our hamburger, and we just eat it, and we trust that we're going to survive the night, regardless. And at the most, maybe we might get food poisoning, have a little, be a little sick for a day or two, and then we'll recover. But that wasn't really the case in the early parts of the 20th century. There were not the regulations. The government did not look at the meatpacking industry and decide to try and regulate it at all. Once again, here is this government impact on industry and government influence. Where is it the job of the government to regulate the meatpacking industry? But without those regulations, who suffers? The consumer. Once again, the consumer suffers when the government stays out of it and allows it to just do whatever it does. So he writes this book called The Jungle. He describes the horrific conditions of workers in the meatpacking and processing plant. And it leads to a lot of things. The government ends up passing the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act to improve the safety of edible products. And so Upton Sinclair's book, extremely impactful. It's the reason why you don't fear going and eating in your local restaurants and buying meat out of the grocery store. In his book, he talks about people not washing their hands, rats running around the factory, running on top of the meat, scurrying, even having rat feces all over the meat, and people, you could take your hand and wipe over top of these piles of meat, just wipe that off. People would put out, poisonous bread to kill the rats. And sometimes, what do they do with the rats? They would take the meat that's going out for sausage and they put it into a grinder and they throw the rats into the dead poisonous rats into the grinder right along with the meat and grind it all up and send it out to your dinner table. Those were the type of things that were taking place in the Chicago stockyard because of the lack of regulations. But what do we have today? And it was sparked largely by Upton Sinclair. We have the FDA, and the FDA is created from the Pure Food and Drug Act that improves safety in edible conditions. And think about how important the FDA is for us today. Sometimes they catch a lot of criticism, but if they weren't around, things would be much worse. So Upton Sinclair and his muckraking writing deals specifically with that. Another very famous muckraker is Ida Tarbell. And I'm not going to go into as much detail about Ida Tarbell, not that she's insignificant whatsoever, because here was a woman, a journalist at the time, way ahead of her time, who took on one of the biggest and richest men in the entire world, and that was J.D. Rockefeller. Ida Tarbell, very famous muckraker. She wrote about the unfair business practices of the Standard Oil Company, the Standard Oil Trust, and J.D. Rockefeller. She wrote a book called The History of the Standard Oil. She highlighted these injustices, and it actually led to the federal government stepping in, deeming the Standard Oil Company as a monopoly and breaking up the Standard Oil Company. Okay. And then finally, the last one I'm going to talk about today is another lady, and this goes to social reform, because at that time, you had a lot of people who were poor. Understand this, social welfare at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century did not exist. That means that if a family didn't make enough money to buy food, they just didn't have food. There were not the circumstances or having things like food stamps or welfare or low cost housing or these other things like that. It did that the safety net that's created by the government today, that did not exist at that time. So people like Jane Addams, who looked at the urban poor and looked at people who really had a raw deal, she attempted to do and create community services for those people. So she started something called Hull House. And once again, you just have to word associate Jane Addams and Hull House. Hull House is part of what we call the settlement house movement, which are these community centers that provide services to the urban poor. Hers was one of the first settlement houses in the city of Chicago, and she provided educational opportunities, job training, childcare, um, lots of services, food services. And this was done not necessarily by government issues, but this was done at a social level. But definitely, once again, the progressive era is about, yes, the government stepping in and creating some reforms, some regulations, and changing things, but also people just on the social level doing it as well. So that is Jane Addams and Hull House. Very, 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 very important as well. Okay. And then I'll talk about our last muckraker, and that was Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis, very important. And he wasn't necessarily a writer, although he was a writer, he was a publisher, but he's more famous as a muckraker because of photography. He used photography to show the plight of the urban poor and the conditions that they lived in. And we don't understand, it's very hard for us to understand today because of the kind of infrastructure that we have, both social, uh, engineering infrastructure, so on and so forth, the things that we have in place so that people don't, living conditions are not horrific. And even with that, we still have people living in the United States under some terrible conditions. But in the early parts of the 20th century, people's conditions were really, 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 really bad. And he photographed these things, and he placed these photographs, made it into newspapers, and it brought light to the problems of the American poor and the people who work living in the poorest of conditions and poorest neighborhoods. So you can see there on page 17 a very famous picture of Jacob Riis of these young boys. That was another thing that at the time you had a tremendous amount of children, homeless children, living in American cities. So that picture of those young boys sleeping in what looks like some type of stoop. And then you can see the level of garbage and clothes and the cramped, confined spaces on page 18. And then one of my favorite pictures is the picture on 19, where you see this group of immigrant workers all living in this one confined space. And I always tell students in class, I say, try to count the number of bodies that are all living in this one cramped, very confined space. Um, your bedrooms are probably much than that space there. And you can see the pots and the pans and the mattresses and even though it's a black and white picture, you can see that the conditions aren't nice whatsoever. So this was sort of the issue, this disparity between the rich and the poor. You had people large numbers of people who were living in very, very poor conditions. And then you had people who were multi-billionaires. So this wealth distribution was a tremendous problem. Okay. But I'm gonna stop right there. Hold up, and hopefully, just to go back, you guys have followed with me. We talked about Jacob Riis as a muckraking photographer. We talked about Hull House and Jane Addams as she helped the urban poor. We discussed Ida Tarbell, always associate Ida Tarbell with the Standard Oil Company. Her writings helped to break up the Standard Oil Trust. And then you have Upton Sinclair. And Upton Sinclair's book is called The Jungle, which he exposes the meatpacking industry. All righty. Sound good? Any questions? Any questions from anybody? Hopefully you guys are still with me and you're not watching TV while you're listening to me. Anaya. No, just joking. Thanks, Anasia, for being here. So let's, if you don't have any questions, let's talk about USA Test Prep really quickly. What I did, as I already said it, I created a class, and if you had to go to Edmodo in order to download the PowerPoint for today. But what you should see there is a link to USA Test Prep. Instead of posting all these instructions, what I decided to do was to allow you guys to just log in. Most of you, if not everybody, already has a USA Test Prep login. If you can't remember the username or password, message me. I can help you to look it up on USA Test Prep. I can just find you and put you in the class, but it's much faster and it's much easier for those people who are paying attention and those people who are keeping up with us for you to just log into USA Test Prep, find my name, find our class, and just join the class. You guys know how to do that. And then I posted just a 10-question quiz there. It is a throwback quiz from our very first. You should have created an account login. You should have your own username and password. But Hillgrove GA is the Hillgrove account. Yes, Hillgrove GA. Yes, it is. But then you should be able to put in your username and your password, and then just join the class, and you can go ahead and start taking the quiz. The quiz is unlimited. Whenever we do start recording grades, whatever you make, you can take the quiz as many times as you want. It's wide open, but whatever you settle with in terms of your best grade on that is what's going to be recorded for you. So if you take the test one time and make a 60, and then you decide, hey, I'm done with this, I don't want to take it again, that's the grade that will be entered in the grade book. But if you make a 60 and then you take it 10 more times to try and make 100, and you make that 100, that's the grade that will be in the grade book. So you can attempt that as many times as you want. Okay. So we got USA Test Prep popping later on this week. I am going to, after we go through the progressive era, I am going to post an assignment for you guys to turn in Edmodo. Just kind of a checking for understanding activity over the progressive era stuff. Okay, so we've got some review going on with USA Test Prep. We've got our PowerPoint and our lessons that we're going to do throughout the week. We got an assignment coming up on Thursday, and that really is enough for us to do. If there are no more questions, guys, we're going to end for today. I do want to try to end at 11:10 every day, just to kind of respect you guys' time. And I know you got other things and other classes to get to. So if there are no other questions about what's going on, if you do have other questions, I'll still be on Edmodo. You can message me, you can email me. I'll try to answer your questions as quickly as I can. But thank you for getting up this morning, guys, and checking me out. Tell your other classmates to get up, and get going, get their lives started. Join us every day, and we'll check you guys tomorrow. All right? All right, guys. See you tomorrow. Bye.